Hey guys, this is Brother Ray Jones with the First Church of God in Princeton, West Virginia. I want to welcome you to our midweek Bible study. Thank you for taking the time to tune in and be a part of this time of learning and growing together. If you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to look with me to Exodus, the 18th chapter. We're going to continue our study in the life of Moses. We're going to talk about the subject tonight of how Moses learns to delegate. While you're turning there, let me encourage you to participate in this service. You feel free to put something in the comments, or you're welcome to use some of those emoji buttons for those of you who are watching this on Facebook. And if this is a blessing to you and you think it would be a blessing to others, we would encourage you to share this with them. We appreciate that in advance. Tonight, as we look at the next part of Moses' life, we're going to look at something that he had to learn how to do that I'm going to be quite honest with you, I have a hard time trying to do myself. And that thing that Moses had to learn how to do is to delegate. Now, delegating is inviting others and getting others involved in the work that you're participating in and trying to get them to participate and to share the load. So let's see what we can learn about that tonight as we pick up Moses' life as it is recorded in Exodus, the 18th chapter. We find out as we go through the first 12 verses of Exodus 18 that he gets a visit from his family. Now remember, he's already led the Hebrews out of Egyptian bondage. They're out in the wilderness at this point. They've come through the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's armies are now gone. They are no more. And the people have begun experiencing some tests from the Lord, some difficulties. And God is putting them to the test to see if they really are going to trust him. And while all of the ebb and flow is going on of, they're really, really hungry and God provides food. They're really, really thirsty. God provides water. And there's this up and down of that going on. We get to a point in Exodus, the 18th chapter, where Moses' family hears of what has happened, and they go to make a visit out in the wilderness. So again, Exodus chapter 18, beginning at verse 1. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for he has said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them along the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Look at what's going on here. Moses' family comes out to make this visit. And we know that Moses had a good relationship with his father-in-law. Not everybody can say that. I hope your reality is with your family, both I hope your in-laws aren't outlaws, as they say. I hope you have a good relationship with the family members you married into. That's very, very important. And again, not everybody enjoys that, but Moses did. And Moses actually worked for his father-in-law for 40 years. So it's a good thing they had a good relationship, okay? Moses could talk openly with Jethro. And that's important for anyone who's in leadership. When they're responsible for so many other people, as Moses was, or to whatever degree you're in leadership, at some point you need somebody that you can be open with and you can have just honest conversations with. I know they have found that pastors often lack in this area. Pastors leading congregations are always pouring out, and listening to the needs of others, but oftentimes they don't have anybody that they can and will confide in. And I began to see that along the way in my journey in ministry, and became proactive in developing some relationships with some of my peers that I could reach out to. That's an important thing to do. So I'm glad Moses had that with his father-in-law, and I hope you have that with somebody in your life. It may be a family member, it may be a mentor, it may be a friend, but everybody needs somebody to talk to and confide in at some time. Jethro rejoiced with Moses over what God was doing in his life. That's an important thing for this person to do with you and for you. When you succeed and when good things are going on, you want them to celebrate with you. And that's exactly what Jethro did. He heard of all the good things that God had done, and he heard from his son-in-law Moses, and I believe he affirmed Moses and the good things that God was doing through him. It's important for us to hear that from those significant people in our lives. And Jethro was in a position to do that for Moses. Jethro also, according to these verses, offered up sacrifice to God. He was one who wanted to lead in worship, and Moses was glad to let him lead them corporately in worship at that point. Then, according to these verses, a bunch of the leaders came together and they shared a meal together. In our terms, they had a good old-fashioned potluck dinner. There's nothing like having a meal together when you want to celebrate something. So at this point in the story, we see this family reunion taking place out in the wilderness, and Jethro's getting to get reacquainted with his son-in-law. Moses is getting reacquainted with his father-in-law and his wife and his boys, and they're all getting the opportunity to celebrate. Then Jethro, as we pick up the story in verse 13, takes some time to watch Moses doing what he does. Pick it up in Exodus 18, beginning of verse 13. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all of the people stand before you morning until evening?" Now, remember, Moses and Jethro had a good relationship. And as they've spent some time together just getting reacquainted and had a meal together and celebrated together and worshiped together, the next day, Jethro's just kind of hanging around, and Moses has to go to work. And he sits there from sun up to sundown, and the people come to him with important questions. And Moses, as the representative of God, as the leader of God's people at this point, is the one, and in this case, the only one, who's helping them understand and discern what God wants them to do. That's an important role to play, but what was going on and what Jethro was able to identify here is that Moses was setting himself up as the only one who could do this. Others may have seen this going on, but Jethro is the one from the outside who saw it and had the relationship with Moses and could talk with him about it. Sometimes it's good to get a neutral third party to put their eyes on a situation and then hear what they have to say about the situation. You know, when you live in your home, you begin to not notice certain things. You may not notice that some paint is peeling somewhere, or that the bathroom toilet kind of cuts on and off because there's a little bit of a leak in the tank. But when you bring a guest into your house, they might hear that water running that you've tuned out. And they may notice some things that you've just become accustomed to in your home because you're there all the time. That's what was happening here. Moses was just in the middle of doing his routine day in and day out. He wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to maybe coming up with a better way. And Jethro could step in and see, hey, explain to me what's going on here. Now we see from this that Moses and Jethro had communication that was a two-way street. Jethro asked good questions. Moses gave honest answers. That's the way it is in a healthy relationship. In any healthy relationship that you are engaged in, you can ask good questions of that person. And when you're in a healthy relationship with someone and they ask you questions, if it's a healthy relationship, you ought to be giving honest answers. Nothing to cover up, okay? Moses goes on to give a very honest explanation of why he's doing what he's doing. Verses 15 and 16 of Exodus 18 says this. Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws. Moses wasn't bragging, nor was he complaining. He was simply honestly replying to Jethro's question. I'm doing what I'm doing because the people come to me to know what God wants done in a certain situation. And Moses was indeed the one God had called to do this particular task in getting his people, and leading his people rather, out of Egyptian bondage. But we're about to see that God's going to work through Jethro to give a better plan on how things can actually be executed. Jethro offers a better way. Pick it up in verse 17 of Exodus 18. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You're not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice, and I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do. And moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they shall themselves judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace. Look at what Jethro is recommending here. He's watching what's going on. And while he realizes and can acknowledge that Moses is doing a good job, he realizes that that's an unsustainable pace that he's trying to keep. At some point, Moses is going to wear out, and the people are going to wear out, because there's only one person hearing all of these matters and offering judgment on them. They needed a better way because the current way they were using was unsustainable and exhausting. Now, the better way that Jethro was suggesting is Moses teaching groups, training other people to do what he does, and delegating the responsibilities out to them. And then Moses didn't just run and retire and hang out on the beach somewhere. He still was actively judging the more difficult matters. So Moses wasn't going to be lazy in what he was doing. He was going to continue to work. He was just going to enlarge the capacity and the effectiveness of the work overall by involving some other people in what he does. He was going to learn how to delegate. Now, let's be careful and understand this. Moses' way was working, at least to a certain degree. The people would come to him, he would give the judgment, he would seek the Lord's face, and he would give the judgment accordingly. And while that way was working, there was the high likelihood that some people weren't getting their needs met in a timely fashion. So while Moses' way worked, it did not work the most efficiently. Jethro's way was easier on everybody, and it was a better idea. It wasn't that Moses' way was bad per se or wrong, but it was not going to be as effective as Jethro's idea. So we've got to bear in mind, Jethro could tell Moses these things because of their relationship. You've got to have the right relationship with someone in order to be able to give them constructive criticism. Most of us won't receive criticism from just anybody. Now, most of us are pretty good at offering criticism, right? I mean, just about anybody can sit back and say, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. And a few people who identify that things aren't going well actually have better ideas on what to do. But in order for that to be conveyed to someone effectively, there's got to be a good relationship there. And the better the relationship, the more likelihood you have of being heard. I heard the story about a man whose occupation was to go into factories and evaluate the processes that were being used and make recommendations to help increase production and streamline inefficiency and all this kind of thing. Well, this same fellow was sitting at the breakfast table one morning while his wife was cooking breakfast, and he just casually got to observing what she was doing. And when breakfast was finally ready and she brought it to him, she sat it before him, and he looked at his wife and he said, "Thank you, honey." He said, "But by the way, I noticed as you were doing this work here in the kitchen that you do a good job, no doubt about it. But I believe I know some ways that you could have this same work done in about 2/3 the amount of time." And the wife smiled and looked at him, and the very next day, he got his breakfast in 2/3 the time that he'd gotten it before. The only problem was he had to cook it himself. She wasn't interested in hearing his ideas at that point, okay? You've got to be careful when you go to offer advice to someone that you're in a position that the person's ready to hear the advice. And gentlemen, by the way, I wouldn't go offering that advice to your wife unless you bring chocolate and roses first, okay? Anyway, in this situation between Jethro and Moses, Moses heeded the advice. Pick it up in verses 24 through 26, and let's see what happened. So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. In this situation, Moses really needed some help. And in this situation, Jethro was able to deliver on that help. And the advice that he offered was good advice to begin with, and Moses was willing to receive it. Now again, let me reiterate, your best chance of offering advice that someone will heed is if you have a good relationship with them. Somebody told me one time that to remember this, the people who ask for your advice just barely want it. I believe that's true. I've found that to be true. And bear in mind, Moses really wasn't asking advice here. So Jethro was really kind of stepping out on faith and kind of sticking his nose where some may have suggested that it didn't belong. But he was trying to be helpful, and it turns out what he had to offer was helpful. So as we wrap up tonight, I want to share with you a few things that are kind of roadblocks to learning to delegate. Here are a few of them that I've experienced myself and or observed in others. One is this: if you're going to delegate, it takes some time on the front end. If you're going to include other people in the work, you've got to train them. You've got to sit down and talk with them and explain to them how you would like things to be done. Or ideally, you may be able to just simply explain what you want the end result to be, and then you can empower them to use some of their own discretion to get there along the way. But if you're going to delegate responsibility, you do have to pick out some people who are trustworthy and responsible, and you've got to invest some time in that relationship so that this can work well. So a lot of times, most people aren't willing to delegate because of the time that it takes on the front end, and they think, you know what, this is taking too long and this is too hard, I'll just do it myself. I've been there and I've done that, okay? I can remember when I would tell my kids to go clean their rooms when they were younger. It was like, why do I even bother with this? Because you'd tell them to go clean their room, they would pick up a few things and do the best they could, but then I'd end up cleaning up after them anyway. Well, the reason it was important to go ahead and start training them then, even though I had to clean up after them at that point, is while it would have been a lot quicker for me to just go clean it up myself, they needed to learn how to clean. I didn't want them to become adults who lived like pigs, okay? It was my responsibility to teach them to take responsibility in something like cleaning up. So that took some time on the front end, but it actually paid off later on. That's the way it is when it comes to delegating. It will take some time on the front end, but it'll be worth it later on. So don't let the fact that it takes time on the front end keep you from learning how to delegate. Another thing that I found that keeps me from delegating is that there are some things I just like to do. I don't want to hand it off to somebody else. I'd rather do it myself because I enjoy it. That's okay if things are only going to be at a certain level. But if things are going to grow past a certain point, you're going to have to learn how to delegate that to other people. One of the things that I thoroughly enjoy doing is making homemade peanut butter chocolate chip cookies, and most of the time giving them away to groups of people. Sometimes I just make them to enjoy them and give them at a small level. And if you're just making a batch of cookies, one person can do that pretty easy. But at some points along the way, as a congregation, we've made them and given them on behalf of the church to larger groups of people. Well, if you're going to get that done in a timely manner, you're going to have to share some of the fun of making those cookies. And while I enjoy making the cookies myself, because of the sheer volume that needs to be done from time to time, I gladly welcome some help and delegate some of the responsibilities in doing that. You won't delegate, or you resist delegating to others if you really like doing the task all yourself. Another roadblock to learning to delegate is being unsure if the person you're delegating to is competent enough. I get that. There can be some uncertainty of, will this person really be able to do the job? Sometimes that's warranted, and you find out as you invest time in someone that they're just not capable of handling the responsibility that you're trying to ask them to handle. And that feels like wasted time at that point. But what you have done is you've learned a little bit, okay? And they have too. But sometimes we're not sure, or sometimes, let me put it on me, I'm not sure if the person I'm trying to delegate to is competent enough. And what I really mean by that is, will they do it as good as I'll do it? I know that's really arrogant, okay? I willingly admit that, because what I found out is a lot of times they'll not only do it at least as good as I will do it, they'll do it even better. And that can actually be a little scary. That'd be something else to talk about on a whole different time, in a different lesson. But if you're unsure of who you're delegating to, whether they're competent or enough, that will be a roadblock to delegating. But let me offer this as well. You're not going to know until you spend some time with them. And if you don't invest that time and find out, you potentially find out that they are competent enough, and then the work is increased. So it's worth doing. The last thing that I will suggest is this. There's this phrase that says, if you want something done right, you need to do it yourself. I understand the validity of that statement. Sometimes I've delegated some things to other people, and they didn't do it right. They didn't do it, not only did they not do it the way I would have done it, but what they're doing is, it's not as important to them as it is to me. I remember years ago, back when Blockbuster was a thing, and I'm telling my age now, I know. I had a movie that needed to be returned, and I lived out from town, and some friends of mine were there at the house, and they were heading back to town, and I asked them, I said, hey, do you mind on your way back in dropping this off at Blockbuster? And they said, sure, we'll do that for you. Well, I handed that off to them. I delegated a responsibility, if you will. I asked a favor. Well, a few weeks later, I got a bill from Blockbuster. It had late fees that I owed, and it was for the movie that I'd asked these people to return for me because they were heading home going to town. Well, they didn't return it that day. They waited a few days, and then they returned it. And at the end of the day, it didn't cost them anything because they returned it a few days later, but it ended up costing me. I understand the mindset that says, one, if you want something done right, do it yourself. And two, nobody will take care of your business like you do. Both of those things are thoughts that can be true, have a lot of truth in them. But if you stay in those mindsets only, you'll never delegate anything. And then you pay a more difficult price. There's a price tag for not delegating. When you don't delegate, you're eventually going to burn out. You're going to face frustration. You're going to get exhausted. And you're probably going to become bitter or cynical. You see, when you take on the work all by yourself like Moses did, it can make you feel important, and you can be sure it gets done and gets done right. And by that, you mean to your standard. But it's honestly unsustainable. You will indeed wear yourself out. And when you get to that point of exhaustion, you can then start looking around saying, how come nobody's helping me? Well, one reason that nobody's helping you might be because you didn't take the time to ask. And then if they said yes, you didn't take the time to invest what you needed to invest in that relationship in order to be able to delegate well. Moses learned to delegate. That's the good news. And I'm trying to learn to delegate. I'm on that journey. And I hope you're learning to delegate as well. I want to leave us with a few quotes. Theodore Roosevelt said these words: the best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick good men to do what he wants done, and self-restraint enough to keep from meddling with them while they do it. Those are wise words. A guy by the name of Dale McConkey said this: a manager who cannot delegate is as about competitive as a school of guppies at a convention of barracudas. Pretty interesting analogy there. And this quote is unknown, but we'll end with this tonight. Never put off until tomorrow what you can get someone else to do today. Learn how to delegate, my friends. It's important to do so. And when you learn how to delegate well, you're going to increase the impact that you can have on what needs to be done. And from a faith perspective, learning to delegate and administrate over ministry activities helps increase the work of God in this world. So I'm glad Moses learned how to delegate. You guys pray for me that I learn how to do it as well. Thank you for your time. God bless you, and have a good evening.